Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore.
Hey, welcome to Boggy Talk. Hope you're doing well. How you doing, James?
I am doing fantastic.
Yeah. Why are you doing fantastic?
Because God's good.
Summertime.
Yeah.
And the weather is soupy, right?
It is soupy.
It's rained so much.
It's been such a...
So, man, how about Sunday in the 11 o'clock service with a severe thunderstorm warning and alarms going off and kids sheltering?
Were you in there when I was like, I guess you guys are okay.
No, well, I was actually in the studio recording a testimony video, and but alarms are going off, and I was getting texts from the safety team. And,
that's funny. In the sanctuary, I was literally like, I guess everything's okay because I'm preaching and these alarms are going off.
I mean, where else
Jimmy
you gonna
Dunn's
go?
like, he like spoke up, like, what's
funny.
going on? I'm like, thankfully this isn't being recorded. We don't record the 11 o'clock. So,
it's funny, but hey, everyone's okay. Praise God for that.
As far as we know.
Yes, as far as we know. But we are back last week from the Southern Baptist Convention 2023 in
Speaking
New
of
Orleans.
storms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So, hey, we're going to spend some time talking about the convention, what it was like, some observations, some takeaways, kind of helping
in
people.
In a special 2 episode.
Yes. I feel like we need some special, dramatic music.
Insert that in later.
But
that was like Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
And
it was the breaking
what's
news.
What's Dun 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 from? Where did that come from?
I don't know. It's just probably some 80s cartoon or something.
Probably.
And now we just use it as a joke.
Yes, we do. Okay.
Hey, we just wanted to explain a little bit about what happened at the convention, what even is the convention, kind of just some, overall thoughts on what happened, and then some specific issues that came up and were voted on at the convention. Really to communicate to our church family some things beyond what you may read in social media to give some, clarity to.
Can we pause there and say it is really weird, like. You're there at the meeting.
Yes.
You're hearing what's happening, what's being said. And then you go to social media and you see articles and you're like, that does not actually represent what's taking place. It's just so amazing how dramatized that is.
It really is. And there's people who are writing from their specific point of view, their specific agenda.
Their specific market.
Yes, and their market. Yeah, that's very true.
Remember that.
Trying to give explanation about what's happening, to feed the followers. And a lot of what you read on all sides. I'm not going to say one side of an issue is the guilty party because you really read it from all.
That's true.
It's very hard to read an accurate.
Multifaceted.
It really is.
It's like a diamond.
Yeah. So let's talk about what is the convention and kind of what the structure was. And I'll just start there. So the first 2 days were actually a pastor's conference.
That's right.
And it's basically just preaching and worship. And through music. It was great. Lots of people speaking that Sunday night and all day Monday. And so our staff team was able to be a part of that. And then Tuesday actually begins the convention. And so some people ask, what was it like? Were there like breakout sessions? I was like, no, like imagine a church business meeting with 12,000 people. And that's what it's like. And they're like,
People form their own breakout sessions.
Yeah, people
because they're tired of being in the
that was
meeting.
kind of funny when someone's speaking they don't like. There were people who literally like a whole group of people just get up and walk out.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
like,
true.
That's
strange. Yeah,
very strange.
Yeah.
But rather than focus on all the weird things first, let's talk about what is actually good and healthy in it. So what is good is that really. Part of the Southern Baptist Convention, this 2-day convention of cooperating churches, is that everyone does have access to the microphone.
They do, yeah.
And I think there's representation of all different types of churches. There's churches from, big cities. There's small rural churches represented. There are communities like ours that are like, Niceville is kind of an anomaly in terms of a type of community. We're not suburban, but we're not near a big city, but we're not rural.
We're not on the beach. Yeah, we're weird. We're weird, man.
We're just nice.
Nice and Weirdville.
So all types of churches, different ethnicities, represented in the room and churches. And so that's beautiful. And different sizes. You have full-time pastors there. You have church members who are there. You have bivocational pastors. You have really lay volunteer pastors pastoring in the rural communities, all who do have, basically equal access to the microphone in terms of making motions, giving feedback, if it falls within the time clock of Robert's Rules of Orders.
Yeah, in general, it feels like a waste of time that's the case. But the reality is there's that power that if something were going the way it shouldn't go, any person can get to the mic and bring that up before the rest of the church.
And it does happen.
Churches.
Yeah, it does happen. So it's 2 days of that.
Yes.
Yes,
it is.
The highlights are
dinner, lunch.
dinner, lunch, and dinner, the breaks. But every Southern Baptist entity gives reports.
Yes,
so you
they
have
do.
the International Mission Board, North American Mission Board, the seminaries, Guidestone, the ERLC, all giving reports. And then there's times of questions, which some of those questions are great. Some of them you're just, dude, that was not a great question.
Agenda.
Yeah, you're trying to, which we could talk about some of that later. So, 2 days of that. And I do think it is very healthy for us to be represented as a church and to be involved because it does help us keep a pulse on where things are in the convention and stay informed for our body.
Yeah, agreed. Our church gives a considerable amount of money to SBC causes, so we have a vested interest in what's done with that money for the kingdom, or not for the kingdom, and should be for the kingdom. So, I think that I guess I would just say, like, this meeting in general. I walked away feeling 3 C's capture.
You're such a pastor.
3 C's capture. So I guess there's 4 C's, but they capture or summarize our convention right now. I would say conservative. I think that it was very clear from the floor. And decisions that were made that we are conservative, in terms of our understanding of Scripture and how Scripture has been understood historically to be applied. I would also say we're cooperative, that there is a cooperative spirit, even from many who don't get their way. They're not leaving, they're cooperating. There are some, but by and large, people are together and we're sticking it out and we're figuring this out together. And then I would say that I think there are a lot who are concerned about drifting in various directions, whether that be a liberal drift, egalitarian drift, a power drift, whatever it might be.
Ultra conservative. All those drifts.
Right. I just would say, so if you were to say, like, summarize the messengers: conservative, cooperative, but also concerned.
I think that's a good analysis there. Good job.
Thank you, man.
I would say there was a general sense of cooperation and care. And really that is unified. I mean, I think anybody even unfamiliar with Southern Baptist would say that one of the greatest strengths of Southern Baptist is the cooperative spirit, specifically regarding ministry and missions. And the missions efforts that were highlighted through the International Mission Board, North American Mission Board, church planning, a big emphasis on disaster relief and the impact it makes, send relief. That is the bread and butter. I think that really, there were 79 IMB missionaries who were commissioned, which is a beautiful, moving time. When you hear their testimonies and where God is leading them, highlights of churches that have been planted through the North American Mission Board. So those are the things I think that healthy, mature people, and most are there, say, hey, we have different ways to interpret different issues. We have different approaches to ministry. We have different contexts, but ultimately, what we're able to do together for the kingdom is better than all these other things. And worth it. Yeah.
It's just funny. I would say that, I've been to the last 3 conventions in a row. I'd taken a little break just with being new here and kind of, all the transition going on here. Then I kind of began to be convicted. I'm like, okay, our church gives so much. I need to go represent us. And so I started going in 2021. The spirit of this one was a lot better. However, it did feel like everything was debated. But it wasn't like this overall negative, tension. But like we got there. So I told our group
8 o'clock Tuesday morning.
Yeah. And I told our group, hey, be there by 8:30 because that's when the business starts, right? And so the committee on order of business who sets the schedule was just presenting the schedule. And there was already like tons of people debating that as we were walking in.
Debating the schedule.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, boys, buckle up, and girls, buckle up, So I just feel like there's so many little opinions on every single thing. And it's just, it does kind of detract sometimes. But again, ultimately, it's a good thing. So
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about some of the big things that happened that were discussed or presented. We've already mentioned the International Mission Board, North American Mission Board, the highlights and celebrations that happened.
Yeah.
But one of the big things headed into this convention was the update and the update on the Sexual Abuse Reform Task Force and the report that they were given or going to give. In fact, because business ran over on the time, there's a schedule of all these things. The business on the floor ran long, and so their time actually had gone over, and they weren't able to present. And so it was moved until the next day because they, not just have to, but wanted to give them ample time and did not want the abuse Reform Task Force to have to rush through things. Ultimately, I think they provided some clarity on the direction forward, and it was voted upon to give them another year to continue working on the reforms and the implementation of those plans. You want to comment on any of those?
Yeah, no, I mean, that pretty much summarizes it up. There's a lot of things you can go and read about it. The big debate is on this Ministry Check resource, which is a database that we can go and utilize to search for anyone who has been convicted of and or credibly accused of abuse in the past. And I think there's a lot of concern over that because so there's two sides. One side says, hey, we need to have anyone who's ever been credibly accused because the typical offender, he threw out some stats that I'm not sure how he got that high a number, but it across the board, unilaterally, people who study this say the typical offender has offended multiple people before they're even actually caught offending someone. And so if someone is credibly accused, the reality is there's probably a great threat to them being in a leadership position in a church. And so we should put those people who they haven't been convicted, but they've been credibly accused on this website so that churches are warned about them. The other side says, okay, well, this is someone who hasn't actually been charged, hasn't actually been convicted, and yet we're putting them on there. And then what are the real criteria and the ensuring of those criteria for them being put on there? And there's a great concern that you would have a lot of people's lives ruined because if they're on this website, we wouldn't hire them, So even if just the fact that they're on that website alone, we wouldn't bring that upon our church, right? So, man, there's a lot you could debate there, right?
Right, there absolutely was, and I think they did provide some clarity on how someone would end up there, and it's not just being accused, but there's research and investigation that goes into it, and so after I think that did help. For many people there, not everyone, but it really helped most people. I think, now we understand. And what it did is provided clarity for what the situation that you were talking about, which I think was good.
Right.
I think there are still people who say this is too little, too late, and should things have happened sooner? Yeah. But I would say my takeaway from this, being there firsthand and hearing it and seeing it, is that, really our convention is acting in a very serious way to bring about reform and prevention. The goal is prevent at all, whatever we can. Let's work diligently to prevent that. And so I was very encouraged by that.
Yeah. I think as well, the challenging thing here is we are autonomous churches. So they can't come in and make any of these churches do anything. They're just trying to create a culture in which our churches are aware of this and have a resource to help avoid being in these kind of situations.
Right.
And I think the group is doing a good job. It's not ideal. Again, it doesn't please anyone.
It's a really difficult job to do.
And it feels like, there's one group who's almost like burn it all down, right? And it's like, that's not the answer, because unfortunately, in this world, we'll never be in a place where there is no abuse, right? Right. We'll never be in a place.
Sad reality.
That's because of sin. But we've talked about issues related to this in the past. But then we don't also say, well, sinner's gonna sin, so we're not gonna do anything about it, right? Like we are called to shepherd,
right?
And I think the ultimate goal here is to work together to shepherd people better. And so like, in addition to that, there's the caring well training. But so two more issues, like the other group who kind of is against what this group is doing also doesn't like the utilization of guideposts,
right?
Resources who, I think we're trying to, I think we're trying to look how we can branch away from that, but ultimately like they're the only ones who are really willing to maintain this database for us. I think, or work with us on this database at this point. And so I'm not crystal clear on what is happening there. I think the group ultimately said we need another year before we fully implement this, right?
Right. Yes.
And so then the objection to that is, well, so much money is being spent.
Right.
And that's a fair concern.
It's a fair concern because we shouldn't just be throwing money at something if there's not, a yield from it. However, this is going to take a lot of money. I mean, it just is. And it's ultimately the goal is, this is where I'm like, trusting. I'm like, the goal is, this is the goal. It's going to take wise people to do it. They've been tasked to do it. Let them lead the way. And it's going to take resources to do it. So, I mean,
the group seems like a very good representation for us of men and women, people who've experienced sexual abuse, people who have training in this area. So again, they're ultimately going to make their recommendations next year. And I just think, there's not going to be any clear cut, put a bow on it. This is exactly the perfect solution. It's just not going to be.
Right.
It's how can we do it best? And so I voted to give them another year because I do support them having another year. And at the end of the day, like from a righteousness standpoint, like, yes, I understand that this expense is hurting theoretically what we could do otherwise. But if we don't get this right, like
everything else, it's kind of a stack of cards that falls apart. I think if we don't get this right, it just is. I mean, this affects every entity. It affects our missionaries. It affects our churches. It affects everything. And if we don't do this right, like it is like you said, it's a stain. And it's. I don't know. It's just, we have to do it right.
It's like if you exercise and do all the exercises you should do, but you don't eat healthy, you're really not healthy. Your vitals aren't where they should be. And I would say it's like that. It's like churches that grow, but don't value discipleship. It's that similar concept.
Right. That's a good one.
And then I would just also say, like, people who think, hey, let's just stop this. Like and we shouldn't function this way, but they're thinking with a business mentality a little bit, right? Like, it makes no business sense because do you realize how much that will damage the reputation of the convention?
Right. Yeah. And that shouldn't be what guides us. But
it shouldn't.
Yeah. And you said that, but it's like, duh. Like,
like back to us, like even if we knew somebody who was on that ministry safe website, who'd been credibly accused, who we really felt like they weren't guilty, we wouldn't hire them because that would just, the message that would send, it wouldn't be wise. Like, so it's just not wise to just say, nah, we're done with that.
Man, it's worth taking
that seriously. Will be written about.
Yeah.
Terribly.
Yeah. It's worth taking very seriously.
I get it that we don't want to be reactive, right? Like that our culture is moving towards this DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion. There is some great valid stuff to say about that movement, but we can't be so reactive to that movement that we are antagonistic to everything related to that, right?
Yes,
like
100%.
Because this care about survivors is God's heart in the scripture.
Absolutely, he restores. Yeah,
so
he's a defender.
I wish it wasn't as expensive. If I was on the task force, maybe I would do things differently, but I'm not, and I don't want to be. And so like.
And they are ultimately the leaders that were chosen to do this, and so let's let them lead through this.
And by and large, the group did agree with that.
Yes, so, So that kind of leads into the next thing that happens. It happens every year. Typically, every 2 years, a new president is elected, but there is an election every year. Right. Typically, in the second year, the president who is nominated for the Southern Baptist Convention does not have someone who runs against him. However, that was not the case this year. Bart Barber, who has served as the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, did have someone run against him.
He did.
And this issue of abuse reform, the task force, was one of the issues brought up in this other candidate, Mike Stone, running for the presidency. And there is a long history in the past few, a long history, but a detailed history of all this in the past few years. You could search that out of kind of everyone's involvement and all these different things. But ultimately, there was a challenger for the presidency. And so that it happens every year, this election. And so let's talk about that and the presidential election. I'll start with the current president and the president who ultimately was reelected, Bart Barber. He's a pastor of a church of around 300 in a rural community, and just when you envision a Southern Baptist pastor, he's kind of like the prototype in terms of like just a faithful, man who is trying to lead his church well. I felt like conducted the meetings really well, and kind of has an all shucks personality in terms of how he does stuff, but also incredibly smart, and detailed and direct, which is great. I really appreciate his approach to leading the convention.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to add to him, and then talk about the election?
No, I said on Twitter, and I agree with this statement, that I think that the direction of our convention matters and the tone of our convention matters right now. And I think he sets that very well. Lifelong Baptist, and really in a more traditional Baptist church, and I just like the spirit of the convention. I just felt like this kind of amateur version of Hillsong that we try to emulate at the convention wasn't how it looked this year.
Yeah, it was not. It was very diverse, lots of different styles of worship and music. Yeah, and different people leading. It wasn't produced.
Everybody looked like they go to a CrossFit gym every morning. Like
we're trying to protect this image.
It seemed
very like,
it
hey,
represented the kingdom.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I thought, man, this is just good. This is every person's convention. It felt a lot more like that. And I think Bart has a lot to do with that. And I think, I went to the 9 Marks at 9 group one night, and they were saying like, it's just unthinkable if you go back 20 years to think a pastor of a church this small would be the president of the convention, because it was all about platform, building your platform.
How big your church was.
And I think it's indicative of where a lot of younger leaders we're tired of that.
Right.
And that's still, I think we see that in our church a little bit, like, because we jokingly like, not that there haven't been significant changes to our sound system and lighting and all that, but it's not showy.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are at our church because they don't want that, but yet they want engaging and relevant, and so I feel like our convention reflects that as well. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think going back to what you said in the past, how the president would have been someone from a very large church. And honestly, I think they may be great leaders. That shouldn't disqualify someone from me, but they're probably not fully in touch with the actual like issues of leading, like
for most churches.
Most churches, a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, because most churches in our convention don't have large staffs. They don't have tons of resources. They're just full of people who love Jesus, who believe the Bible is God's word and His authority, and want to carry the gospel to the nations. Many of those large churches are the same way. However, you're just removed from that because of the busyness that comes from leading a large church organization.
I have said often that, like, when I hear some of those guys talking, who, again, I know some of those guys, I love those guys, I'm like, there's a disconnect between what they would say and what we are facing. And our church is 5 to 10 times bigger than the average church that's at the SBC. So I feel this disconnect. And then I realize there's a disconnect between us and these churches. And so it's like, it's just kind of becoming a smaller focus and more intimate. And I think that is a reflection of where we're headed. And so I think that's good. And I voted for Bart because I felt like he is doing a good job. He is conservative. He's trying to keep us unified, and he deserves another year. Not like he has the right to, but like he deserves it.
Yeah, and I do think that at least from what I observed, is very fair. and was charitable to people who maybe didn't agree with him or opposed him in certain things. I feel like, at least what's presented, I don't know what happens behind the curtain, but to me, he just seems like a very fair, reasonable person that I felt was very trustworthy. So,
yeah, I agree. And so a friend of mine nominated Mike Stone. And, I think we talked about this last week, like the concern is over that drift, towards liberalism, egalitarianism and other things, and a group that is just moving us in that way. I'm simplifying it majorly. I agree. We got to keep that on our radar. And so he was saying there's this time for drastic action, and that we need somebody who we know where they stand. I don't know where Mike Stone stands because he closely identified intentionally with the Conservative Baptist Network 2 years ago. And now he's kind of saying, hey, I'm not. To me, why?
Yeah.
And so that gives me
some pause. Yeah.
And in addition to the fact that I feel like Bart is doing a fine job and he is keeping us in the right direction. He does have a pulse for all those things. I don't fully trust,
And trust is a big deal. I mean, when we are removed several layers from that. And so you are limited, and you have to trust with what you can try to discern. And that's where you land.
Yeah.
I agree. And it is pausing to say, well, you were identified with this group that seems to, be playing up this division, playing up and all. I mean, I don't think you could have attended the convention this year and been like, wow, there really is this liberal drift.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that next week.
Next week, there really was affirmation. Now, I would say if you are everything has I think in these kinds of conversations, there's a spectrum. And so if you are on I hate the left and right, terms, but that's what we understand in the culture. If you're on the far
that
right.
That might end up on a Synodoc on YouTube
exactly.
It already has. But
already has. So, if you are on the
maybe coming to a Boggy Talk one day.
far right of things, everyone appears to be drifting to you.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to be really careful in how we're labeling people. And I do think that there are some mirrorings of our greater national political landscape that you do find themes of that in all of this. And so asking God to really help us discern those things and, and ask for his wisdom in it.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think some things, and, this might be something you want to reach out to me if you're intrigued by more. I do think, and so I have friends who I would consider are very sympathetic to, hey, we should have went with Mike Stone for these reasons. And I have friends who would say, oh man, we should have kept Saddleback in for these reasons. So like they're really on far ends of the spectrum here. And I do think that a spirit of this, and I'm not saying that any of my specific friends are consciously buying into this or people are consciously buying into this, but I think there is a group that used to have the most influence in the SBC. And they are losing that.
This is true.
Part of it is just they're getting older.
Yeah. And culture and time and the landscape of things has just changed.
Yeah. And part of that was Ronnie Floyd, who was the former executive, president of the committee that resigned. And there was just a lot of questions about him. Part of that is just kind of all that. And then there's a new group that are probably 20 years on average younger, probably most personified by J.D. Greer, who, and I'm not saying,
at least that's who they want to be personified by. I agree. Yeah.
I'm not even saying, and I'm not saying JD is even this, but there's that group, some of that group that they are gaining influence now and they're viewed as the establishment. And it's so funny because like you'll read tweets and, documentaries and blogs and they're like talking about the establishment, but each group talks about each other as the establishment. And I will say that kind of convoluting everything is that desire for influence and control and direction. And again, I'm not saying that I don't know anyone who specifically knows that and is trying for that. But if you don't see that there, and as a part of this, then I think you're blind if you're on the inside. And I talked to some other people about it who definitely see that with the moving of candidates and all that. And again, I don't really think either one of these groups are liberal.
Right.
But I think that clouds our judgment about how we see the other group.
And it begins with that self-examination of like, why am I drawn to this? Am I trying to gain influence? Am I trying to, it begins there. Like, why am I drawn to these specific teams and really asking those questions? I think that's a really good way to put that. It comes back to that felt or perceived or real loss of power and influence. And ultimately, should there be that? I mean, we think about the Southern Baptist Convention. We shouldn't have that,
No.
But it's just the reality of culture. And I think going back to the fact that the current president is a pastor of the smaller church, even 300 though, that's a large church by many standards. I think reflects that desire to move away from the quote unquote establishment. And
but what the old establishment would say is he is a puppet by the new establishment.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they're saying.
Yes.
So. And he, I don't think that to be true. Yeah. I could be wrong, but I don't think that to be true.
We can be wrong about but I agree.
Yeah, and I think this is why very few people want to be the president. Very few people want to be in these positions. It's really difficult now.
Yeah, because you can't make everyone happy.
And can we? How much time do we have left on this?
We've got just a couple of minutes, and then we're gonna wrap it up, and then we'll pick everything else back up. Next week.
Can we talk about one big thing that I observed that I think is a challenge in our convention and less and less young people are present.
That's good. Yeah,
because and there are many statistics saying that there are less and less people going into ministry. And I think that with the internet and social media and the way that attacks are constantly on leaders, this is a problem.
It really is.
And we have to figure out what to do about this because and I would say it's not easy anymore. There's been days recently where I'm like, we have a great church, but just being attacked and criticized, like as a leader, where I'm like, man, this is
it's hard.
This is going to be the next 20, 25 years of my life. Like, I don't know if I can mentally do it, and I think you could speak. I think I have a lot of resolve comparatively. I think
absolutely.
I'm pretty tough.
You do. You're tough. But it just wears on you. And I think, when you see those kinds of things happen, and then how it affects your family, it does weigh on you and it does wear on you. And I think that many younger ministers are just saying, is that worth it?
Right.
Is that worth it? And I don't think they're not saying, is Jesus worth it?
They're not.
They're absolutely not. And they're not saying,
some are, but not.
Is God's glory worth it? No, but it's like, is dealing with that worth it if I could do something else that I perceive could be just as effective for the kingdom. And I think it really is going to be, a constant theme you hear already right now is we can't find quality worship pastors. We can't find quality student pastors. We can't find quality pastors. Yeah, we can't find quality pastors.
Lead pastors.
People are saying that.
Real pastors.
And it's not just,
Sorry.
real. When are you going to be a real pastor? That is the case. It really is the case. And we could probably do several weeks on that. There's a lot of factors into it, but a huge piece of it is just the culture of ministry right now.
Yeah.
And the cultures of churches really mirroring the culture of our greater country, our country than the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, it's something that I've heard. And again, I was in school, so like a lot of extra bandwidth didn't exist for me, but like now I'm really thinking about it and I'm like, man, how are we preparing, and calling out the called and caring for the called? And there's going to have to be some different ways that we, care for pastors, and pastoral staff. And I would say, how we view leadership, at our convention as well, because it's becoming more and more difficult. We're not, and it's the internet. It is the internet, it's always been difficult to lead.
Yeah. Yeah, but before the internet, and now even more so with social media and platforms, even then, most conflicts still had to be dealt face to face or in proximity. And now conflict is just lobbed anonymously without relationship, and it makes it much more difficult because you don't really get to. It's hard to discern what's true. So yeah. Anyway, well, hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. We're going to pick back up in the next week. We're going to talk about some of the specific issues, including the disfellowshipping of 3 churches, some of the resolutions that were passed, explain what that is, and some of the resolutions that were passed, and talk about some of the greater debated issues that came up at the convention. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.